Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the recently released Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and see how it compares both visually and from a gameplay perspective to the last entry to the series, the remake of Ratchet & Clank from 2016. For this analysis, both games are being played on the Sony PlayStation 5, with the most recent patches installed, and the new Rift Apart game set to its 4K quality mode to ensure the highest quality visual presentation. However, before we get started, I do want to clarify that while Rift Apart's quality mode does lock the game to only 30 FPS, there are visual options that can be tweaked in the menu at any time, allowing players to swap over to a much smoother 60 FPS performance mode, and even a target 60 FPS performance mode with the ray tracing effects enabled. Meanwhile, the 2016 Ratchet & Clank game was first released for the PlayStation 4, and only targeted 30 FPS at the time, but has since been updated to allow for 60 FPS on the PlayStation 5, while also stabilizing the dynamic 4K resolution. Also, it should go without saying, but Rift Apart is a brand new game, built to take full advantage of much newer hardware. So by default, we should expect to see improvements across the board. So today, I'm going to highlight exactly what Insomniac has managed to improve over the course of the past 5 years, along with what new gameplay features have either been introduced or reintroduced to drive the Ratchet & Clank formula forward. So let's kick this comparison off by first going over the character models, starting with our heroic Lombax, Ratchet. Ratchet has seen some incredible improvements to his model complexity and general quality. The first thing that stands out right away to me at least is the improved texture quality. He's wearing an identical outfit here, yet it almost looks entirely different now that we can actually see all those fine details. His leather boots and gloves, for example, now have fine stitching along the cuffs that were never visible before, and his knee pads have small scratches along them to give them a more battle-hardened look. Even the straps used to hold Clank to his back have a new visible wear along the edges. And then of course there's the fur effects that were pretty decent in the remake, but are really expanded upon in Rift Apart. You can make out each and every hair along Ratchet's body, with very little hints of that pixelated fuzzy look you usually get with these types of fur effects in games. What's more, if you look really close, you can actually see those hairs moving independently, unlike the fur in the remake where it's mostly static. It's an incredible amount of detail, and the way it's scaled based on the camera distance creates the illusion perfectly, without completely tanking the performance in the process. Moving on from Ratchet, we have Clank. Of all characters in this series, I really didn't expect much of an improvement with Clank, as he's made up of some pretty basic shapes. But I was surprised to find that he's completely transformed with this latest outing, while still retaining that iconic design. His eyes, for example, are still circular and green and occupy the same amount of space on his head, but the lenses now have this fine, textured pattern to them, similar to the compound eyes found on insects. Clank also sports superior bump map surfaces, making the connected metal pieces feel more distinct from one another, and most notable of all is the smart use of ray traced reflections here, that help deliver a much more convincing brushed steel appearance. Those small scratches from before aren't there anymore, though this was likely more of a deliberate design choice based around the story itself. Other characters like Captain Cork and Skid have seen similar improvements to the design, with higher poly counts and a ton of detail that would have never been possible before. And it's incredible to see just how much further Insomniac were able to push the designs while still keeping their cartoony aesthetic intact. Moving on, we have environments. Ratchet & Clank games regularly feature a wide variety of locations to explore, with each level generally being a completely separate planet, often with a distinct biome and core theme attached to it. Rift Apart continues this trend, only there's a few very distinct changes fans may pick up on as they explore. If you didn't already know, Rift Apart centers around the concept of alternate dimensions, and every area in the game frequently takes advantage of this concept, with large tears instantaneously transferring players from one existence to another. And aside from a very slight stutter now and again, this technique is pulled off flawlessly, delivering a surreal collection of different universes all within the same playable space. You can, for instance, walk straight through a dimensional portal into another entirely different location without a single loading screen, which is pretty fascinating from a technical standpoint. But even more impressive is the insane amount of detail that Insomniac managed to cram into each of these playable spaces. The environments in the remake look great, in that they capture the essence of the original game faithfully, while also feeling more rounded out and expanded upon. But the worlds of Rift Apart feel about 10 times more dense overall. There's so much happening wherever you look, from the hundreds of flying cars speeding around through the air to the densely populated city streets, littered with lots of unique debris and decor. I especially love this junkyard planet about halfway through, that sports an overwhelming amount of environmental props and moving pieces, along with a really nice draw distance and well-rounded LOD. And with the help of some seamless scripted moments, it genuinely feels like you're being transported into an animated film. And remarkably, it's not all smoke and mirrors. These worlds really are as detailed as they look from a distance, with some great high-res texture work on all the surfaces that I observed, far outpacing the quality of textures of similar objects in the remake. Even smaller details like grass blades have had their density bumped up a good amount, and will even dynamically react to the player, allowing them to bend under the player's boots. It's also worth noting that Rift Apart's levels, from a gameplay perspective, have also been reimagined a bit, making the experience feel more modern as a result. There's still your typical linear scripted levels to play through here and there, and you'll still be able to hop into your personal ship and revisit older levels to search for collectibles and complete side quests. But some of these levels have this unmistakable increase to their size and complexity, especially this wasteland-looking planet, that requires players to blast along with their hover boots to cross large stretches of desert. It's not quite an open-world game, but it kinda gives that same feeling, just like Uncharted: The Lost Legacy did. And what's nice about it is that it changes up the pacing quite a bit from the likes of the remake, letting players explore at their own pace. But it doesn't do so excessively, and returns to more linear design soon after. Next up, we have lighting. The lighting is an aspect that worked fine before, but certainly left room for improvement. In the remake, the lighting is all pre-baked, with very specific moods tied to each specific level. But aside from some soft bloom implementation, some occasional volumetric light shafts, and very subtle screen space reflections and cube maps thrown in, it comes off looking a bit flat at times. Fast forward 5 years, and we have Rift Apart's lighting, that looks absolutely incredible pretty much all the time. The game kicks off with this beautifully lit city skyline, with some great global illumination and volumetric lighting, mixed with some post-processing effects like depth of field to enhance the vast scale of this city-wide parade sequence. Soon after, we're treated to a drastically different scene, set in a dark, rain-soaked city that really plays into the beautiful ray trace reflections. There's still a few cube maps thrown in now and again, like when looking at the reflection off of a character's eyes. Though, the fact that the developers even bothered to incorporate a reflection in such a small detail in the first place is commendable on its own. Overall, the lighting just blew me away with this title. Insomniac has delivered some gorgeous lighting effects early on with the PS5 with their Miles Morales Spider-Man game, and the remastered release of their previous Spider-Man. But this is on an entirely new level that feels purposely built around showing off as many reflective surfaces as possible. Additionally, the coloration of the game worlds in general just has a more lifelike feel to them, while still feeling tethered enough to the cartoon aesthetic that the series makes use of. The shadow quality has similarly been improved, ensuring that every projection always feels as accurate as possible, and behaves in accordance with the type of light being emitted. The remake handles shadows similarly, though the shadow resolution is just not quite as sharp, resulting in some blurry edges and pixelation when zoomed in close enough. And other effects like ambient occlusion aren't nearly as pronounced in the remake as the newer title, making it harder to distinguish between finer details on both characters and environmental surfaces. Then of course we have effects. Effects are a big deal in the Ratchet & Clank series, considering the wide range of zany weapons available to the player, and Rift Apart delivers substantially in this area, with an unbelievable amount of particle effects no matter what weapon you choose to blast your enemies with. Colorful sparks and explosions will completely dominate the screen during battles in ways never before seen in the series, and it's almost so mesmerizing that it's hard to keep track of the action at times. What's even better is that the performance, even during the most intense combat encounters, still holds steady at whatever visual mode you have selected, with any dips being negligible enough that they never really impact the flow of the action. When considering the effects themselves, you can tell pretty easily that the quality of things like fireballs and explosions have been improved a good deal, making them feel slightly more complex than their cartoon-like counterparts. And liquid surfaces like puddles and bodies of water now ripple when the player interacts with them, whereas these same surfaces in the remake barely reacted to the player at all. Next up, I want to briefly cover some of the bigger gameplay changes that you'll experience in this latest release. There's a lot, some of which could potentially be spoilers, so I'm only going to briefly mention some of the bigger, more obvious changes that I feel are more representative of the collective experience. So first off, this Ratchet & Clank game does introduce a new playable character called Rivet. Now, I don't want to talk about the character too much, but I will say that despite her different appearance, she's fundamentally identical to Ratchet in terms of how she plays. The controls, the movement, even the inventory are all directly shared, so it's really just cosmetic and built around the story, rather than introducing something different to the gameplay. I think it could have been a little bit more interesting to give her some unique capabilities to help mix up the pacing a bit, kind of like how Mario and Luigi, while similar, do handle differently. But considering how frequently Rivet is used throughout the game, I can understand why Insomniac opted to keep the gameplay identical between the two, in order to avoid players feeling like they only got half of a Ratchet & Clank game. Another big feature is the inclusion of the alternate dimensions in the environment. I mentioned this before briefly, but it's worth reiterating as it does play a pivotal role in the exploration and traversal. Occasionally, players will find these yellow tears in space, which can be used to grapple to distant locations, and are used in both platforming sequences and during combat to allow players to easily reposition. There's also special purple tears that serve as hidden bonus rooms throughout the game, usually with a difficult platforming obstacle to overcome and a chance to earn some valuable loot. Other than that though, the only other way the alternate dimensions play a role in the gameplay is through distinct scripted moments throughout the story, where players are forced to dodge obstacles during some intense chase sequences that carries them from one dimension to the next. These are certainly some of the most exciting moments in the game, but I do wish they had found a way to incorporate a little bit more alternate dimension stuff into the gameplay. There's technically something else that I didn't mention in regards to this that helps to address this problem, but it's not something you'll find out about until much later in the campaign. Other new features in Rift Apart include new Clank-based puzzle areas, requiring players to guide a trail of other Clank possibilities to a door using a series of tools. A new Spider-Bot minigame, where you have to try and clear out a computer virus infection by shooting little viruses. A new version of battle arenas that let players master various weapons and skills. A return of the hover boots. And a number of PS5 specific features, including incredibly fast load times that feel seamless, and a lot of DualSense functionality that allow players to feel every footstep, gunshot, and explosion with the DualSense controller. They even set it up so that the alternate fire for weapons can be controlled using the new DualSense's adaptive trigger stops. This blaster, for example, can fire a single trail of bullets when holding the trigger halfway, and a stream of bullets fired at a faster rate when the trigger is pulled all the way. Finally, let's wrap up with a brief sound comparison. Which game do you feel has the better audio quality and sound design? And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is a masterpiece across the board, at least as far as the Ratchet & Clank series is concerned. It perfectly captures the artistic direction established with the series, while still improving on it in every conceivable way. It's rare to find a game that actually feels like a next-generational leap, especially this early on in a console's life cycle. But if you are lucky enough to snag a PS5 and have been looking for something to really flex your 4K TV, then this game will no doubt impress. The character models look fantastic, the environments are richly detailed, and the lighting design, with the help of ray trace reflections, really helps deliver something remarkably good looking. And what's more, the game is a lot of fun to play too. Sure, it's incredibly cheesy from a story perspective, as its target audience is certainly younger, but at this point, it's just part of the Ratchet & Clank series' charm. And I love the additional characters like Rivet, who were given just enough time without drowning out the long-stay series protagonists. But regardless of how you feel about the story direction or even the updated gameplay design, there's no denying that this latest game is the best the Ratchet & Clank series has ever looked. But what do you guys think? Are you impressed with Rift Apart? Or were you expecting more? Let me know in the comments section. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this posted every week.